Um, so emphasis is the arrangement of elements in art to make some areas the primary focus of the viewer's attention. On this Amy Sillman piece, what would you say is the area that's more emphasized? Where do you go first?
Yellow.
This yellow thing over here?
Yeah.
Other people? Yes? No? Something else?
The ridge.
Up here?
Yeah, I was going to say closer to that, the yellow behind it.
I kind of go to this like textury stuff first.
I go to the big
You
dark
go down
shape,
here?
the big line.
This one down here? Yep. So different people go different places. This one doesn't have a really strong, obvious, single point of emphasis. It actually has several different points. So there's still hierarchy, but the first place you didn't go probably was this little area up here in the left corner, right? That's a subordinate element. Okay? If it wasn't there, this wouldn't work as well. It needs to be there, but some areas need to be more dominant. In this case, the red, yellow, and blue, the primary color triad, reds of these guys, this bright yellow over here, and then the blue, this big chunk of blue over here, is kind of what pulls you. And this more textured area in the middle, where they blend all three of those colors, helps it pull together. Here's another piece. This one's a little bit more obvious. In this case, the dominant area is this sort of grouping of objects up here, and then as you get further away and they kind of spread out, that's the subordinate stuff. And it's still interesting. It wouldn't be as good of a piece without all this stuff. It was just this. But you need to have a place that you go to first, and then areas that your eye can travel from there. And this one's pretty obvious because the shapes are all about the same size, and what's really different is the amount of contrast with its background, the amount of difference of the light and dark, how saturated or desaturated it is. Okay. So dominance, the difference is that, okay, the differences that emphasize the degree of importance of various parts are referred to as dominance. Areas become dominant when they're emphasized by contrasts. So to create something to be more dominant, give it more contrast. The greater the contrast, the more emphasis, which means it's the more dominant area. On the piece on the left, the Cindy Sherman, well, the big contrast is this white spot right here of the person's face against this dark background. Also, there's a lot of detail, and in fact, faces tend to be pretty dominant in any case because we're humans and we will track, even as tiny babies will track to a face. The same elements arranged like a face, then they will track to elements not arranged like a face. So a face creates a dominant area anyway. The Polly Applebaum piece on the right is a bit more difficult because sometimes the larger pieces you would say would feel more dominant, but other people would say, well, a lot of the smaller stuff altogether has greater texture, visual texture, so that kind of pulls your attention. I kind of feel like there's these dominant pieces on the edges and then they kind of pull together. But that one's a little bit more questionable. It doesn't have a single dominant area. It has several. Okay, so ways of establishing emphasis and subordination. You can create a hierarchy of elements or aspects. You can use isolation. You can establish a focal point or a center of interest. The way you place different elements and aspects will create emphasis and subordination. And then you can use directional lines, invisible and implied lines, to focus the viewer's attention. So visual hierarchy is it's a term, we don't see it very often anymore in artwork, but for a long time, it was a principle of visual organization where certain elements were more important than others. And what would happen is these arrangement of design elements would be done in terms of their importance to the expressive purpose of the work. So this guy right here is the most important person in this composition. He's got angels that are not even as big as he is on the sides and up above. Everybody's kneeling and, oh, you know, there's this triangular organization that, with his face as the focal point. And these people are actually quite a bit smaller. They're actually physically smaller in the composition because they're less important. So in this case, the size of the person indicates the relative importance of that person in the idea that the artist is trying to convey. Isolation is, here's a weird example. This is Susan Lothenberg's Liftoff. And there's really no place else to look. You know, you can't really get away from the action that's going on in that bottom corner. Isolating something gives it stronger importance. If you have a whole bunch of something and then you have a space and then you have one little guy off by itself, that little guy in many ways becomes as important, if not more important, than all the rest of them put together. If it's isolated, it pulls your attention. Focal point is created when lines are pulling you, directional lines are pulling you toward a specific spot. The wham if you follow that word, brings you right in here. So this is a really strong focal point in this piece by Roy Lichtenstein. On the right, the Ding-Q Li point, I think this is a focal point. This is a primary one because it's all bright, and all of the one-point perspective lines kind of lead you that way. And then the other focal points are these sort of ghostly faces. So there's kind of three in this piece. When we talk about placement, can create emphasis. Would you say on the right that these bottles have more emphasis than those bottles? Because they're placed in contrast to this larger piece. And also, I think it's kind of interesting because you've got a little bit of internal context going on here with the two women and then the two bottles right next to each other. There's a comparison between the women and the bottles. You know, the hourglass shape, you hear that term. So there's lots of stuff going on in this composition like that, but I think that this is a good example of how placement can create more emphasis. It's harder to look at some of the things over on this side because you keep wanting to come back over here to where there's greater contrast. Grids. Several examples of things organized on a grid. This is a number of pieces by Laurie Lynx Murphy, who made all these square objects and then put them up on the wall. And just the fact that they all have horizontal and vertical edges, and those horizontals and those verticals line up with each other, makes this otherwise very dissimilar arrangement feel like it belongs together anyway. That's one example of a grid organization. On the bottom piece on the right, the Sean Scully Bridge, all the elements are vertical and horizontal, and they're broken up in similar ways. When you talk about a grid, you could be talking about something that's perfectly, lots of squares like graph paper, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that. The Chuck Close piece up here, the self-portrait, this is a close-up of the eye right here. See that right there? Those two squares are those two squares. And this thing is gigantic too. It's another one of those really, really huge pieces. But the whole piece is based on this gridded out space and then the circles inside it.
Like, how did he do that?
I don't know.
Like, did he just...
I have no idea. It's amazing. I have no idea how he did it. I've wondered that for a long time myself, actually.
Like,
He's even gotten gray in the beard, too.
I know.
Well, color shifts are.
I have no idea how he did this. It's amazing to me. Because look at all those different colors in there. You wouldn't think that much yellow, because look at the eye. It doesn't seem very yellow at all. It's all optical mixing. This is a perfect example of optical mixing. From a distance, you get this skin tone, this really rich skin tone. But you look up in close, and it's all these like bright reds and purples and oranges and pinks and stuff. It's staggering. I don't know. He's amazing. And it's gigantic. I think it had something to do with projecting, but even then, I don't know how he did it. If he had a prism that he was shooting it through, or what, to determine that. Anyway, it's still based on a grid. And then linking is when you've got leading lines that link through extensions with implied and subjective edges and lines and shapes. Did I show you this one already? No. This is Caravaggio's piece, The Calling of St. Matthew. And one of the things that's going on here is all of these lines in the composition are leading to this guy. This is the focal point, even though he's hard to see here. Look at how this, in fact, look at all this going on. All these triangles, this line, that's a strong line. This guy's hand points this way. Even this cane down here is pointing up here. So your attention is really brought over here. The triangles are kind of pointing in that same direction as well. So this is kind of the structure of the composition. This is no accident. These guys planned these compositions very carefully when they did them. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about before we're done is economy. The distillation of the image down to its basic essentials for clarity of presentation. When you see, I think Japanese calligraphy and sumi painting are some of the best examples. There's not a lot else going on. You're focused directly on just the subject and the elegance of the line and the brushstrokes. And if there was a lot of background, you wouldn't notice that as well. So economy is this idea of paring away, taking away the elements that are not necessary till you just get the heart of your idea that really expresses it the most cleanly and the most succinctly. So, like I said, sumi paintings are a great example. There are a number of pieces by some of the abstract expressionists. In fact, it's not Franz Klein, it's one of the other guys, who did probably 30 or 40 of almost the same composition, because changing things just a little bit each time until they got the perfect elegy to the fifth. What is his name? I gotta look it up and find it for you guys. But this sort of idea of a compositional ideal. Franz Klein did a lot of these compositions too, that they were all very similar to this particular one. Little things changed, a little bit different, until they got the one that they felt was like it. Okay, that's it. And we have 5 minutes left. Look at, whew.